for some people, arcane area of energy and propulsion and things of this sort from an interest that goes back to when I was very young as a child. And my uncle was the senior project engineer for Grumman, who designed the lunar module, put the first man on the moon. That was called the LIM, which is over here in the Air and Space Museum in Washington. In 1990, I started a project to identify and bring forward information that had been previously classified through illegal rogue projects in the aerospace industry primarily, but also some military. And some people would call those things that don't exist. And so my specialty, as most of you already know, I don't need to go into this, were the disclosure of that information. And so we began a process of identifying the systems that are in place that have secreted these this technology and information away from the public. And we founded the Disclosure Project in 1993, disclosureproject.org, to put the sources of information, the military, intelligence, corporate witnesses, as well as the documentation and documents from government sources and corporate sources together and bring them out to the public. And we did that. 2001, we had a National Press Club event. It was seen by about 300 million people around the world. It was the most watched event in the history of the internet for a live news event with 22 top secret military people at the National Press Club with the world's cameras there, and it was loaded to go. First hour of it was electronically externally jammed, but it was loaded back, and we know who was doing this, but it was loaded back up. Through the period of the early and mid-90s, we were very busy trying to encourage the government to bring forward this kind of information on what some would call UFOs. They're not unidentified and they don't fly, so that word, just put it out of your mind. And the exotic energy and propulsion systems that Lockheed Skunk Works have had, and Northrop Grumman, my uncle's company, and other entities have had for at least 50 years. But we found out that the executive branch, in the case of President Clinton at that time, were not prepared to do so because they were afraid of the consequences to themselves personally if they did so. And we found then that members of Congress...
What would the consequences to them personally mean?
Probably termination. So...
you're saying they would be killed?
Yes, that's why they told us. So the congressional leaders that we met with, such as Senator Bryan of Nevada, who was on the Senate Committee and Intelligence Committee, and others, all wanted to know about it, but they didn't want to hold hearings or provide funding support. So we discovered that there's an enormous amount of interest in the world on this issue, and even in places in power, so quote unquote. But as the Honorable Paul Hellyer has said, there's basically two governments. There's the government that we elect and appoint, which knows very little about what's really going on, and there's a permanent government. I'm quoting from the former Minister of Defense of Canada, who did a press conference with me last May. And essentially what we have found is that the only way to get this problem resolved is to put together a group of brilliant engineers and scientists who are gathered here, and a strategic team to privately, in cooperation with friendly elements within the military, within even the Department of Defense, within the media, within the celebrity community, Hollywood, rock stars, the public, and put a strategic protective umbrella around the technologies which we know are extant on the planet today. We have knowledge that these technologies, and can prove that these technologies have existed since the time of Tesla and the late 1800s. Even Stubblefield with his Earth battery, which basically was able to run systems from the energy that could be configured from the energy that was in the Earth. That was 1902 when he did a demonstration here in Washington. And I have pictures of this with him standing with Tesla. Now, people have to then ask, why are we then still using coal and gas and oil? It is because we have a system that is gamed for a centralized petrodollar economic cartels. It isn't about what's technically possible. It isn't what would benefit the Earth. It is not because of national security, obviously. If it was about national security, these things would be out. So it is about the aggregation of power within 200 to 300 families and individuals who essentially control and own the $200 trillion asset base of oil, gas, coal, and the delivery system for that. It's not a small issue, $200 trillion. So the project that Arrow has embarked upon, which is to put together the best scientists operating systems as they currently exist or can be made to exist within a short timeline, within a year, and fund them properly, and put them within this strategic umbrella of force protection, security, massive disclosure. And by massive, if you have less than 300 million people who know that you have it and that it works, it's not enough. At least that number of people. We're talking, 5% of the world's population, but 300 million people in the world. And this can be done, because we've done it and beta tested it through the Disclosure Project, through a very well put together and orchestrated, multi-dimensional strategic plan. Most people in the inventing world think that the issue is, gee, if I just had enough money I could do it. Well, I can cite you all kinds of people who have had tens of millions of dollars, upwards near 100 million, and they were served their head on a platter and have never been able to get their technologies out. On the other hand, if you have all the money in the world, and there's a family I know that have 3 $250 million environmental trusts, and they're crying every day the world is going to hell in a handbasket because we're burning up the biosphere and destroying the oceans. You got to hook up the funding people with the technology, and the third component, which is my role, is the strategic leadership to bring together the forces and the force of protection around this whole process and bring it out. That's the purpose of Arrow. We are dedicated to doing this, and we have a track record that we have been able to do it and live to tell the tale. Many years ago, I had a man who was high up in naval intelligence come up to me after a talk that I gave, and the first words out of his mouth were, "I don't know why you're not dead yet." And I said, well, I do. And I know why. Because we did not step onto this stage until we had the means to do it safely. And so what we want to do is extend that umbrella to people who have these technologies and provide them with the funding, but more importantly the strategic support and the network, so that it is not another tree that fell in the woods that nobody heard. Now, and if you look and you deconstruct the last 100 years of technological development, there have been, I would wager, several thousand, and I'm being honest when I say several thousand scientists and engineers and inventors who have discovered, if you will, from the knowledge that's there in human awareness and in the greater consciousness, if you will, the mind of God, the secrets of the universe and these wondrous sciences. But one after another, they have stepped into this minefield that they didn't know was there. These hidden mines, and have been taken down one by one by one. I'm not saying this to disgust anyone or to scare anyone or depress anyone. It's to say that that's there. Because there's enormous corrupting influence when you're talking about the kind of money and the kind of power that does not want an energy device that extracts energy from the quantum vacuum flux field, or some call it zero-point energy field. And remember, every cubic centimeter of space in this room has enough energy to run the Earth for a day. I'm understating it. It's actually infinite. And the point is to tap it and to rectify it and to get it to run this house with real power is an engineering and science challenge which has actually been met by the aggregate people in this room who know how to do it. And you'll be hearing from them. I'm just a country doctor from Virginia. But my job is to pull together the resources and provide both the funding support but also the strategic support so they can do it. And I don't think that we can overlook the necessity of having these people all working together. So there's synergy in the operation, but that they're plugged into a system so that they can float above that minefield. We will deactivate it as we float over it. Because if you have, and this is just sort of a quick list of the resources that are in our network, senior ambassadors with major countries who are ready to step forward with us on the stage of the National Press Club or at the National Science Foundation as these things are unveiled to the public massively. And you have people who have been Nobel Prize winners, and then you have people who are very well known in society in the pop culture and what have you. You pull all these elements together and you move this forward. Because if there are hundreds of millions of people who know about the system or systems, it's not going to be the tree that fell in the woods that no one heard. And here's the tragedy. Most of these technologies that have been developed from Tesla's genius on, and maybe some before Tesla, have been the tree that fell in the woods that they took into the grave with them. And what we need to do is set up a dynamic where we stop doing the same thing over and over again, because it's been done for 100 years. Now we need to see that this is something that can be done. We can achieve this within the next coming few months and years so that our civilization transforms from a carbon-based, cannibalistic species that's destroying a Gaia, Mother Earth, to one that has sustainability, the elimination of poverty, the freedom from our oil addiction, quoting an occupant of the White House near here, and moves our civilization into another order of functioning. This is not pie in the sky. This is attainable with the brain trust that's in this house right now. And we have to identify clean sources of funding, clean sources of strategic networks, which is what we put together, and the best scientists to work together. Because in the conversations that have happened over the last 24 hours, we have found that one scientist has one component and figured another has another, and you put them together and it's an order of magnitude ready to go. And so this has never been done. What Aero wants to do is to, in our initial phase of around $43 million, is to put together a program that would, like a campus. Xerox did it at Menlo Park. It's been done before on other technologies, where the inventors and the researchers are supported, properly funded, but also from the get-go strategically protected. Let me explain the difference between strategic and tactical protection. It's very important to understand this because the threat matrix that has been stopping these technologies from coming forward is formidable. It is not to be taken lightly. And if you don't believe it's there, step into it and you'll find out it's the mother of all buzzsaws. And been there and done it. I've had to go through the buzzsaw several times. I'm here to tell the tale. But if you look at it, tactical security would be having a security system on this house and some people and armed guards. So that's not a big deal. I mean, that's tactical. Strategic security is having an entire system in place that protects against any action being taken against an entity, whether it's a corporation or an inventor, in the first place. And what do I mean by that? If you put a system of protection and a strategic plan around a technology, let's say that there's a motor here and it'll run this house, it's 20 kilowatts, closed loop, free energy, quote unquote, although it's a terrible term. Free from the point of view you're not paying the power company, let's leave it that. And if this is happening and you stand that up, well, if you don't have enough people in the masses out here who know about it, it's going to be easily taken down because the obscurity of it is its death knell. Now everyone thinks I'm going to build a better mousetrap and the world will be the path to my door. Not in this case. Somebody else is going to beat that path to the door, and it isn't going to be the good world. is going to be this classified world and this shadowy world of projects that have stopped these technologies from being disclosed to the public. And so we have to learn from this 100-year history. And if we do, then we'll be able to move forward safely and quickly. Now, the other part of this strategic concept is that the 6 billion people on Earth are your vanguard. They love you. They want these technologies. Bubba, with his pickup truck, where he's spending $80 to fill it up with F-150 pickup truck. He wants some way of running that vehicle without paying $80 a fill up. Even if he doesn't care about the environment. Even if he's a global warming denier on the payroll of ExxonMobil, all right? Through the back door, a scientist. Most people do not want to spend thousands of dollars a year for heating, cooling, electricity, and their vehicles. And they don't need to. Because the amount of energy that's available through these systems is boundless. And it will provide this means to move our society forward. So the masses of people, if they know about it, and it has been vetted properly, and this means the technology has to be, number one, transparently tested by multiple, at least 3, independent laboratories and scientists who have neither a financial nor a protagonist argument here. In other words, they're not parts of the new energy effort, but they're open-minded, and we have identified these people. Number 2, it must then also be reproducible. What does reproducibility mean? Well, there are people who've stumbled across this effect, but didn't know quite how they did it, and when they try to make machine number 2, they can't. So an N of 1, as in a scientific study, N of 1 is of no value. What is useful is that it has scientific reproducibility. And it would need to go through that kind of independent scientific reproducibility under careful circumstances quickly. And at that point, you put that in front of the world. Now, most people think, well, let's do this in a subtle way. We don't want to rock the boat. We'll hide my machine in a rock crusher or in a forklift operation where we're charging the battery. I'm giving you cases that are going on today as we speak. Ain't going to help. It's the tree that fell in the woods nobody heard. And you know what? That's going to go into the grave with them and all the rest of us if we don't snap out of that thinking of paranoia and fear and say, we need to make a bold step forward with strategic leadership and protection, proper support, network support. The network needs to include the billions of people on Earth who will know about it, the mass media, which even the corrupt aspects of it can be circumvented, which is what we did with Disclosure Project. That's why the video at disclosureproject.org has been seen 10 times more than the highest rated Larry King Live show. And I've been on Larry King Live, and the highest show that he ever had was when I was on it, 2-hour special. Now, the question becomes then, how do you put all that together and then create the momentum so that you're acting from the point of empowerment rather than dependence? Up until now, the isolated inventors and engineers have had to fund these things out of their back pocket, on their credit cards, and in an isolated way. And this is a tragedy. They need to be properly funded. But at the same time, they need to be properly protected by the masses knowing they exist. Not by name necessarily, but by what they're doing. And if they want to be named, they can be. I don't advise it. It's not pretty. You know, people coming up to my house at John Q. I don't know who they are, knocking on the door at 2 in the morning. But what you do want to have is a lot of people who are in the friendlies within the government. And let me give you an example. You know, when I was back a few years ago doing briefings for the Pentagon, the J2, the head of intelligence joint staff, and the head of the Defense Intelligence Agency, were furious that they had been denied access, as had the Director of Central Intelligence, with these projects. And so I walked in there with a 550-page briefing document that had the depositions and testimony of 110 top-secret corporate military people with their DD-214s and the documents, many of which are top secret that have not been declassified. I declassified them. And how? We declared them illegal. The operations behind them were rogue. A priori, they can't use the National Security Act to keep them secret. Therefore, we went forward with this, and I'll never forget General Patrick Hughes sitting there going, well, I've asked about this, and I know what's going on. And he went over to his bookcase, and it was, of course, in the E-ring of the Pentagon, and he had this beautiful conference room, and the colonel and a few other people were there, and he picked up this little doll from a 5 and dime store that was like a little E.T. doll. He says, this is all I've gotten for my inquiries into this matter. And I said, yes, sir, I understand. And of course, I can tell you that the Director of Central Intelligence and your counterpart in the United Kingdom, the head of the Ministry of Defense, Lord Hill Norton, who I've met with, as well as Admiral Wilson, who's the head of Intelligence Joint Staff, have all been in the same boat. You're victims of the compartmentalized operations that have escaped the oversight of the executive branch, the Congress, most of them, there are a few people, and I know who they are, who are in this group, and the people. And they are rogue and illegal. Now, what's interesting is that that created its own dynamic, where now, people, you would think that you're going to have a lot of resistance over at the Pentagon and at Langley. No, you're not. Why? Because most of those guys are now furious because they know they were being lied to about operations and projects. Now, you're asking, why don't they step forward with this? Because everyone wants to be first to be second. We live in a risk-averse society. And the buzzword at the Pentagon is CYA, cover your ass. No one really wants to shake these 8,000-pound gorillas up who are kind of running this. And this is why, after we briefed the Director of Central Intelligence and his inner circle, Clinton's best friend came to my house and said, well, they're very supportive of what you'd like to do, but they're convinced he'll end up like Jack Kennedy if he does it. And I burst out laughing. I did. I really thought he was joking. And he wasn't. So the specter of fear has a positive aspect to it in this regard. People within government and within the national security apparatus who have been victims of these programs and are trying to figure out how to extricate ourselves from the Mideast situation and the global warming situation. There are a lot of white hats and good people in government, but they don't know, or they didn't know, that these systems are possible. Now, they're not going to take a leadership role. Why? Risk averse and their own fear and ambition. I'll never forget briefing a senior scientist at the National Science Foundation and one of the directors of NASA, who are both responsible for climate change studies and what have you. And we went through this, and Dr. Loader, who's our science advisor here, helped set up these meetings. And then we had a long meeting for about 12 hours on the West Coast. It was off the record, out of Washington. And at the end of it, I said, we really need your help in getting the support for this information and these sciences and technologies to come out. And they said, oh no, we can't do this. One of these was a deputy director of the National Science Foundation. The other one was one of the 5 directors of NASA. Dedicated their lives to fixing the global warming and climate change problem. Won't touch it. And when I asked why, they said, well, it would ruin our careers. It would ruin our careers. This is a true story. Now, this means that you need some kind of exceptional group of people who are motivated by something beyond careerism, money, greed, fear, who have another vision. And that's what Arrow has put together. Over 17 years identifying those good people, whether it's an ambassador or a former minister of defense, or people in the mass public, or people on the Hill who are supportive, who come in after this is disclosed, or people in the Pentagon who support this but don't want to do anything until after it's out there and the public demands it. So we live in a world where the masses and the public can get behind something like this if you can reach them. And that's one of the key parts of the strategic effort. Now behind that, we do have very good security. I'm not going to go into it here. From the quarters that have traditionally kept these secret, about 50% of the committee, the global committee that has been analyzing and running these projects for the last several decades, is now in favor of this information coming out. Not 100%, but around 50%. When I first briefed the Director of Central Intelligence on this in December of 1993, it was about a third, according to 2 independent sources inside that group. So this has moved along now to where there's a serious window that's opened, and I suggest we move through it expeditiously, because it will not be open for that much longer. Moreover, the Earth is a conscious, living being. Absolutely, she is, and she's female. And the Earth shall cast off her burden if we do not lift it for her. And I suggest here in this room that there are people, scientists, business people, potentially financial people, and people who are connected to institutions in this city and elsewhere, who if they come together, that we can lift that burden, and it'll happen very quickly. We're not talking about a 20-year plan. We're not talking about a 10-year plan. We're talking 12 to 18 months done. Now, done, what do I mean by that? It means the technologies are developed, and they're massively disclosed and protected, and they begin to be applied. The application is a retooling of the entire Earth's industrial infrastructure. All 1 billion cars on the road are going to need to have transitional systems, which I'll go into in a moment, that take them from these polluting gas guzzlers to things that are emitting nothing, but they're still running on an internal combustion engine. Is this possible? Absolutely. Are the technologies extant today to do it? Yes, they do exist. Same thing for coal-fired power plants. Same thing for a lot of the systems that you're not going to just wave a magic wand and suddenly they're going to be gone. But they will then be phased out as these new systems are stood up and brought forward, where you are then generating energy from the perturbation of the quantum vacuum flux field through the resonance fields that can be created through very sophisticated knowledge of physics and electromagnetism, which I'm not going to go into here because I'm only a country doctor from Virginia, and that's not my forte. There are other people who describe that better. But I will tell you that this is something that has been proven to exist. It's not theoretical. And there are people in this room who have these systems and have worked on them, some even in classified projects perhaps. And the issue then becomes, can we come together as a research community worldwide, as a concerned community worldwide, using all the resources that are available, financial, institutional, media, and celebrity. Why do I bring that up? What happens if you have one of the top 10 rock stars in the world driving around in a vehicle that is emitting nothing? Or another famous actor that I know, who's a very interested person I've spent time with, who's one of these guys who's brought in billion-dollar movie sort of things, running his home on a motor that this gentleman, or some of the other people here put together. It doesn't really matter then if the national security state picks up the phone and tells CNN, don't cover this news conference, because you will not be able to put that toothpaste back in the tube once it's been quickly squeezed out. Now, we know this because we've already done it with the Disclosure Project, with the information and documents about these projects that have been kept classified for so many years. I think that we have to understand that there is more support than people can imagine for doing this. But if you go from a position of weakness and go to the Department of Energy of the United States, and you say, I've got something that will get rid of ionizing radiation waste material. And those do exist, and there are people in this room who know about it. And you can get this close to having them do it, and they will decapitate it. And who are the they? There will be the financial interests that are feeding at the trough. That's a tens of billions of dollars a year industry that do not want really a solution to that problem because the problem is so lucrative. This is not a theoretical example. This is an example I learned of today that actually happened not long ago. So what you have to then have is the same system, beta tested, independently verified, and then you have something that occurs in the National Press Club or at the National Science Foundation, and the whole world's watching. And the whole world's watching, and then you go to the Department of Energy and offer to do this. What will happen if they say no? The consequences will be devastating. The political and social and cultural opprobrium will be overwhelming, and they will not be able to say no, because they will then have no choice. Now, this is exactly what you have to do. If you think you're going to do it any other way, I can guarantee you you will fail. Why? Because it's been done for 100 years and failed. You know, the Chinese have a wonderful saying, I'm going to paraphrase, unless we change directions, we're likely to end up where we're going. Where are we going? We need to look at where we're going and where we've been and learn from the past, but then have a vision of the future that makes it through this matrix of control and vested interests that want to keep these things tamped down. Because they exist in a number of areas. The Patent Office, Tom Vallone is here, can tell you about several thousand patents that have been sequestered away. Many illegally, quite frankly. There is a Section 180, 181 of the patent law that allows for this, but it's been abused. And it hasn't been for national security reasons. It's been for corporate, financial, energy sector, and other reasons. And so the corrupting influence of that much power and how it infiltrates the political, governmental, national security state and military-industrial complex is formidable. But what is equally formidable is the power of people coming together and the masses of people being educated, learning. And I'm not talking about just the masses of the public, but the scientific elite, which we've identified who now support this, who know it's real. The leadership in Europe. There's a G7 country, the president of whom is openly supporting this information coming out that we're working with intimately. The issue then becomes creating that network so that that becomes the sheltering branch, to use an old Persian concept, that protects the inventor, the technology, and humanity. So these things can be moved out. That's what Aero wants to do, and that's what we can do. The technological and technical hurdles are, in many cases, have been overcome by people in this room. Now, obviously, there may be generation 1 or 2 of them, and eventually we'll have generation 200. I know what Lockheed Skunk Works has, for example. And they're a generation several hundred. Doesn't matter. So long as it generates enough power to run a home and a business and a car without destroying the Earth's biosphere and creating the clash of civilizations fighting over commodities in this death spiral that we're in today, fine. You don't make the perfect the enemy of the good. But I'll tell you something else, and I've been told this directly from these interests who have been sitting on these technologies. And by the way, my uncle, who's now in his late 80s, is a big fan of what we're doing. The guy who designed the little thing that took Neil Armstrong to the moon. Which is really kind of space junk, because by the time that happened, we already had anti-gravity, so-called mass cancellation, electrogravitic systems up and running. But that's another discussion. The point being, there are people in those networks that he's connected to who are saying, yeah, we didn't think this stuff would have been kept secret past late 60s. And here it is 2007, almost 40 years later, where we're still getting 57% or so of our electricity in America from coal, like the 17 and 1800s. Yeah, we have fiber optics and integrated circuits, but what's running them? A coal-fired power plant out here somewhere. It's insane. So that whole dynamic is something that people are beginning to realize we've really overstayed our course. And if we don't change course, it's going to be changed for us. I suggest that we decide to change course. And it can be done, and I'm convinced it's achievable, within a relatively short amount of time with cooperation, the synergy of the scientific community that are here, and this network which we're asking everyone to help us keep expanding. Doesn't matter, all throughout the world. And with that kind of force multiplier, if you will, you can move all of these technologies out. So our intent is to, we have a couple of angel funders who've already pledged about $250,000 just to get part of this going. We have a transitional funding for about $1.8 million, and then we want to go to this $43 million level. I hope within the next few weeks to have all of that in place. Now, what we have to do is put in front of the people who want to support this, who are willing to take that risk, and I don't mean financial risk, because these are people where, I mean, look, if you've got a fleet of 5 G5 jets, you're blowing that much out of your tailpipe. But who are really going to look at the other risks, and will ask us to be the lead entity to take that risk. Okay, not the inventors and scientists. We want to bulletproof them away from the launch process. Because that's the brain trust. You protect your brain trust. You put everyone at risk. And move this forward. And the financial people, however, need to see the best we can put forward. And so what I'm encouraging the new energy and the electromagnetic engineers who are here and listening is to come together and let's put together the best 1 to 6 systems that exist. Not that might exist or could exist in a year or 5 years, but they can be put together relatively soon. So that those can be put in front of the network that has already been lit up. We already have lit up this network who know and who want to jump on board to move this forward. And I think that we'll see that there's more support than you can imagine. It will be breathtaking. It can't be achieved. No one person, I can't do it by myself. An inventor working in Oklahoma or Salt Lake City or Calabasas, California, or Denver, or wherever by themselves can't either. And the tragedy is that they haven't had the support that they deserve. They have done enormous work, many of them Promethean task and heroically. And they have not had this kind of protection and support, not just financial, but support, real support, from a whole coalition of people who will say, we're going to stand there with you, no matter what, to see that this gets done. And I'll never forget when I was with Ambassador Jim George of Canada, who's a wonderful man. He sort of was instrumental in bringing the Dalai Lama out to the West and did some of the original environmental books in the 70s. And he's a Canadian ambassador, and he's on our team. And he and I were talking about this a couple years ago, and he said, you know, I will do anything. I will step in front of a bullet. I will do anything necessary to help get this done and achieve this. And we have several hundred people of his caliber and connections and fortitude and spiritual resolve and integrity to do this. You can't purchase this. And if there's anyone who thinks that something like an undertaking this profound can be achieved with anything short of that resolve, they're mistaken. Because if it was that easy, it would have been done before I was a twinkle in my father's eye. I was born in 1955, and I can assure you, by 1955, we already had the means to extract energy from the fabric of space-time. We already had the means for mass cancellation, so-called anti-gravity effects. We already had them. T. Townsend Brown was working on this 20s, 30s, 40s, and it had been going way beyond what you know about that he actually had. We already had all that.
And the Dodgers won the World Series.
Yeah, and the Dodgers won the World Series. So we have all had that ability. Now, and so the big message here is a message of hope. Because my children, and God bless him, my little 2-year-old grandson over here in D.C., you know, what kind of world are we leaving them with the zero-sum game of fossil fuels, we're cannibalizing the biosphere when we have amongst us, on Earth today, the knowledge, the brain trust, the ability, the skill, and I feel now, with what Arrow has put together, the strategic leadership to move this forward. It is a moral obligation, and a sacred one in my view, that we do this. So that's what we're committed to doing. And I think that to the extent that all of you here can join with us, and in whatever way you're comfortable, and whatever means you have is important. It really doesn't matter if you're carrying a thimbleful or a gallon measure. If everyone carries what they can carry, it'll get done. And that's really important that we realize, and that we stand together shoulder to shoulder to achieve it. And that's what has been missing. And I believe now that with a lot of hard work and hard knocks that we went through starting in 1990, with these projects and with the people who are in this control apparatus that's kept these things secret, 50% of them or so now would like to see this done. The question is, why don't they go ahead and do it? Because they don't want the question asked, what did they know and when did they know it? Number one. Number two, the other half of the group that doesn't want this done are not necessarily nice to the ones who do. And it is highly fractured. But I have been told that they have our back. There are a lot of people who have our back on this for their security and protection. I could not have gotten this far and lived to tell the tale unless we did. So in a sense, it's a little macabre, but I'm your canary in the mine shaft. As long as the air is still good and I'm still tweetering, you're fine. You know, a leading indicator that you'd be worried about is that if I disappear. But so long as I'm around, because of my role to move this as a prime mover and pull this group together, we can have some encouragement. I think that the people who want to see this happen, who are in positions of power, who don't step up to the plate, often don't feel they can because of familial or peerage or career ambitions or what have you. There's a myriad of reasons why. It doesn't matter. What we have to do is identify the people who will. And so, you know, there's the old saying, many are called but few are chosen. It's a mistranslation. Many are called but few choose to answer the call. So we need to say we're going to answer this and put ourselves at service to. And what I want to vow to do is to be of complete service to you as a scientific and inventor community, but also to the world. I have no personal interest financially, because I don't need it, quite frankly, at this point in my life. My concern, my sole concern, is that we leave the world a better place than we found, and that we are providing the means to transform the planet into its potential to become the womb for the evolution of intelligent life for thousands of generations yet unborn. You know, I'm part Cherokee, and in that tradition, well, some say it's 7 generations, some say 20. But there's this tradition that everything you do should be looking at 7 generations not yet born. But you know what? We're closing out one whole cycle of human evolution. That was a 400 and some thousand year cycle. And we've just opened a 500,000 year cycle. And this is the interface. We're the interface. Boom. And so everything we do now, today, will affect 20,000 generations coming behind us, coming in through time, space, and the earth. So this is why, if we understand that, we're going to go the distance no matter what. And I think that now people have realized the earth has been crying, the ice caps are melting, the ice fields are melting in the Himalayas, the oceans are dying. There are enough people in enough places in society who get it. They actually get the fact that we're in a crisis. Now, they should have known that in the 60s and 70s, but they took about 30 years late. But better late than never. Okay, and it's one stroke before midnight, so I suggest we put together what we can to say, don't lose hope. Here is the knowledge, not just the sciences, but the consciousness and the vision to bring these things out for the peaceful rehabilitation of the Earth's fortunes and the establishment of a sustainable civilization on Earth. That's what this is really all about. And if we couch it in those terms, not another business shtick, not another, it's about that. And yes, we have to mind our P's and Q's and do things properly and methodically. I'm an emergency and trauma doctor, and I'm used to doing things of multitasking at multiple levels, high function. But ultimately, the vision that people want to know is that there's a way to go from where we are now to the potential that is within Earth and human civilization. And that potential has been delayed and forestalled for about 100 years. And now it's pent up, it's ready to break forward. Let's let it move forward. And it will carry, because the universe wants this to move forward. It will sweep it along. We just have to go with that flow wisely, and being aware of the boulders in the stream up ahead. And there are a number of them, big ones. But it can be done. And I think that this is the key message I wanted to bring, is that when we have this information come out, imagine the people on the planet who see no way out right now. They don't know that you can extract energy from the quantum vacuum space or zero-point energy field. Imagine the hope and the vision and the joy that will attend that announcement. It's amazing. It will not only be a technological and scientific event, it will in fact be a world-encompassing, spiritual and social event that will be galvanizing and allow people to see a way into the future, which they don't see now. There's so much hopelessness. And that will dissolve like a PowerPoint presentation dissolves. Boom. And this other image will come forward. That's what we have to put forward, and we can do it. Well, thank you very much. This is a few introductory comments I wanted to make. And I would like to answer any questions people may have. I have a website, arrow2012.com, if you want to read that. We have a business plan, or a proposal. I don't like to call it a business plan. That's so trite. It's really not that. It's a strategic overview plan that has the $43 million budget attached. But I'd like to answer any questions, because I just wanted to introduce it. I don't know if they've successfully recorded it. They tell me it is. It's supposed to be on the internet.
These cameras, just so you know, are for Todd and
They're going to load it on the internet.
hosts to be able to put it online.
Yes.
The cameras can be
Yes,
turned
ma'am.
off, though, or
Mitzi.
you can ask any private questions.
Mitzi, you have a question?
I was having a little trouble with understanding when you say it's out there. Was a lot of this technology developed in the black world? And so it's a question of getting it out so the rest of us have access to it?
No. Well, yes and no. There have been classified projects dealing with this for many, many decades, going back before World War II, in fact. However, there have also been individual white world inventors, scientists, even entire research teams that have had these systems and developed them to the point where they were stable, functioning prototypes. Normally what then happens is that someone comes along and says, well, let me help you, wink, wink. And they will offer them X number of dollars in order to then take possession of that technology, which then ends up on a black shelf at General Motors or GE or Westinghouse or Lockheed.
That
Okay.
part I understand.
Yeah.
I guess
So-
what I'm trying to understand is if you have functioning models today, why can't you get, let me just ask you, on YouTube, which I've never seen, but I am just overwhelmed by what appears to be the power of getting the message out to the millions.
Yeah, we know those folks. And what my point is that we have the Disclosure Project video up there. It's been seen millions and millions and millions of times, like a fractal.
Right.
But yes, what I'm saying is that we're just now that have identified in the last couple of years the people, the scientists who are still living, who have these systems. This week is the launch of Arrow. So that's what we're in the what you're asking is exactly where we're at the stage of doing. But you have to build a strategic vehicle to do it. You have to have a strategic network to plug in a system so it carries the technology. In the past, and I can tell you this, right now on Earth, in our portfolio of identified systems, there's between 100 and 200. We'd have to count them, I'd have to look at them again, scientists and engineers who have some iteration of these technologies. And they have been kind of working isolated And so what we're now at the stage of doing is putting together a strategic group. Well, we have the strategic group, but the funding mechanism to then identify the best of these and then bring them out on a large-scale basis.
Let me suggest that you consider getting an additional team that can look at how you deal with the transition from the way we do stuff now to this new capability.
We've already done that. We've already created the white papers and the analysis of how to do
So you
that.
understand who gets hurt by the change.
Of course.
And then you start figuring out how you deal with them.
Yes, because many of those we've already met with starting in the mid and late 90s, and we've been bringing them along, that's what I was discussing, to say, here's how you can benefit. Here's the tide that can lift all ships.
Right.
And it's sort of like Olivetti typewriters. And I mean, they went bankrupt a couple years ago because they didn't get on board the computer and word processing wagon. So at a certain point, yes, it's in their own enlightened self-interest to do this. But because of the dynamic that they've been able to keep a monopolistic lock on this, that until that breaks forward, they don't really have much incentive to jump on board with you. But yes, we've already analyzed that. There have been very in-depth discussions that our team has already had with some of the
on your website?
financial and governmental and corporate
I'm interested
groups.
in how you manage the transition, because I think that's incredibly hard. I mean, that's where the resistance is. I mean, if you talk to people who are talking about wanting to have the hydrogen car, whatever,
Right.
how do you basically get it distributed around the country so people can have access to it? I mean, the logistics issues related to this are
Oh, you're
real.
talking about logistics.
Well, I think the logistics issues related to any new technology today are
Are
really
huge.
quite
Yes, yes. And this is the biggest
enormous.
one ever. Well, you're going to have to, first of all, let people know it exists, and then have the ability, both financially and strategically, to move them to the point of use consumer. And that is something that you have to control initially.
But
If peop-
imagine from the manufacturing standpoint, if you could look at some of these places where they're laying off people with manufacturing skills,
Right.
and you could say, well, we ought to go in here and create jobs. I mean, if you think about it, rather than the technology alone, but how it fits into a much bigger system.
Well, we have. I mean, this, of course. I mean, I'm not covering everything that we've thought about in the last 17 years, but this has been looked at very, very carefully, and it certainly can be done. And actually, there's a lot of, even in the United States, but never mind worldwide, there's a way underuse of capital and facilities, and human capital, labor. I mean, most of the world, after all, I mean, half the world lives on what, $2 a day? There's enormous capability. And I'll point something else out, because some people say, well, you know, this creates a problem because there'll be too many people using technology. You have the ability to have, and this gentleman had been involved in recycling and was one of the pioneers, if you have, quote, free energy from the quantum vacuum, you can scrub 100% of the effluent from any smokestack or emission into a waterway. You can recycle 100%, because right now we have the means to do that. What's rate limiting is that the energy related to it is expensive, and you reach the point of diminishing return. So there will be entire industries that will be stood up at second and third and fourth order ramifications of this. It's enormous, and we know that. And so what you have today is a, you know, what, $30 to $40 trillion world economy. That will grow to $100 and $200 trillion world economy. And with that, you will have the ability to then not have 50% of the world's population living on $2 a day. And you will also have the ability to have complete recycling in a clean environment as a consequence, and the utilization of a lot of the industrial capacity that right now, in the Rust Belt, as they call it, and throughout America, has been outsourced to other places. Because this is, I mean, so yes, there's a lot of win-win-win situations, and I like to focus on that, and I think you're correct to point it out, rather than who's losing. Because really, the folks, you know, I mean, obviously, if you own $1 trillion oil and natural gas field, this may not be the greatest news for you. But if you've already extracted hundreds of trillions of dollars and you got it sitting out there, who cares? It really becomes about geopolitical power. And I think the strategic issues, which is what I'm focusing on, is what is overlooked. The issue isn't about money. Money to you and me is, can I, you know, I have one daughter at Yale, one going to Stanford Law School, and one, I mean, you know, I have a big nut to crack here just for college tuition. That's what money means to me. But if you're talking about controlling multi-hundred trillion dollars worth of assets, that's about geopolitical power and how the world runs and who runs it. That's what their currency is. That's the real currency. And so that's why it's been so difficult to get this out. If it was just conventional thinking and conventional business concerns, this would not be difficult. It's a much larger issue. But obviously the transition, and I agree with you, that the transition to this is something that has to wisely be done so it's as least disruptive as possible, and is actually something that creates a win-win-win situation for most of society. We can't gloss over the fact, however, that once these begin to really become applied by the hundreds of millions of units and around the world, that the price of commodities such as oil and gas and natural coal will abate and eventually become, well, you know, it costs $2 or $3 to pull a barrel of oil out of the Persian Gulf, Saudi Arabia, and it's selling for 72. So that, you know, it's great profit potential. But I think many of those countries are going to have to understand, and families, it's really the families of these countries, that we have an opportunity here to do something that would pull the whole world forward. And even in those sectors, their enlightened self-interest long term is to not let the whole system melt down. They can't believe that unless they're people who want the whole system to melt down. So I think that that's a very positive thing, and this is how you have to say, okay, perhaps some of those interests, once this is launched and it's known worldwide, it's not obscure anymore, then from the position of strength, you invite their participation to hedge, as it were, the lowering of the commodity assets so that they have an interest in various applications so that it's equalized a little bit. So there's a soft landing instead of a crash. And we have looked at this. There are a lot of strategies, and it would take all night to go into all the ones we've discussed and thought about. Yes?
Actually, I had wanted to augment it. There are a whole bunch of natural allies out there on a huge industrial level. And you know, my alma mater is Aluminum Company of America, Alcoa. 90% of the cost of turning dirt into aluminum metal is electricity. Now, they have no gain in what runs a car, and they have no gain in what heats your house. They're probably the foremost users and builders of hydroelectric dams in the country, and when they ran out of hydroelectric power, they had to start building coal-fired plants, some of the dirtiest in the country. There's a whole world of manufacturing, whether it be in this country or other countries. China's building an awful lot of coal-burning furnaces to create energy to power an infrastructure. Those are natural allies. Not the oil company, not the gas company, but the people who need energy to produce goods and services.
I get all of that.
So that's,
My problem is understanding the technology and how you explain the technology to those that are not a part of the in-group. I mean, you have your own language, you have your own coding system for this, and you all understand that, but you want people like me to say, this does make sense.
Well, we have in our summary a description of that that's in lay terms. This is a meeting mainly of scientific and other people, so that's why we're speaking this way.
Right.
But we have that, and there are.
You're talking about the social aspect as opposed to the scientific aspect.
No, I'm talking about all of it. It's a strategic aspect. Yes, you had a question.
You say you're .com and you also said you're a nonprofit. Which are you?
No, I didn't say we're a nonprofit. Arrow is an LLC. The disclosureproject.org is a nonprofit. That's a separate entity. It's a 501c3. Other questions about this whole area of the strategic plan and what we want to do? All right. Thank you very much. I think we have the next person at, is it time? Who's keeping time?